Welcome back to the Emily Show. Today, we're talking about a difficult and disturbing case out of Massachusetts. And the reason I'm covering it today is one, I know so many of you reached out and asked about this, and you really are looking for the legal side of this case without the sensationalism and wanting to know, how does this case impact potentially the Karen Reed case, because these are both cases out of Canton, Massachusetts, some dealing with the same officers, dealing with the same district attorney's office, and dealing with a federal investigation into a local investigation and what might come from that. So today I am going to break this case down. I am not going to get into all of the detail that is available because we can go through an overview of this investigation, the Fed's involvement, what it means potentially for a retrial in the Karen Reed case without getting into the amount of detail that is here. But I am going to link the U.S. Attorney's Office out of Massachusetts' press statement down below this episode. And that links all of the documents that media outlets have been relying on to talk about more of the details in this case, in case you want to access those and go through them for yourself. So that is a choice I am leaving to you, but I will link that resource down below. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. This episode and all the podcast episodes are not monetized across platforms. Our sponsors allow us to cover topics that are important, but not always platform friendly in a way that works for us as law nerds, and I appreciate that. So yes, it will have sponsors that allows us to cover sensitive and important cases like the case of Sandra Birchmore. And with that, thank you to our sponsor, Green Chef. Green Chef has both your nutritional needs and fitness needs handled this fall with fresh ingredients and plenty of veggies delivered to your door, plus workouts made easy with ClassPass. Right now, you can get 50% off your first box of Green Chef and 50 free credits with ClassPass with code EmilyBakerClass. That's greenchef.com/EmilyBakerClass. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the Emily Show. I'm Emily D. Baker, the internet's go-to legal analyst and big fan of the cursey words. I've been a licensed attorney for over 17 years. I'm a former prosecutor, and I break down the legal side of pop culture and entertainment stories we can't stop talking about. We should just get into it. Let's go. Today, we are covering the murder of Sandra Birchmore because there was just an arrest in this case. I'm going to give a brief overview. We're going to talk about the investigation, why this was a federal indictment, not a state-level charge, and how this might impact the second trial of Karen Reed set for January 2025. These cases both come out of Canton, Massachusetts. First responders were Canton PD. Then they were investigated by state police. Canton is part of the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, but so is Stoughton, and the defendant here is a Stoughton police officer. There is a lot paralleled between these cases, though the police involvement is different here. In the Karen Reed case, Officer John O'Keefe is the victim of that case. In this case, the officer is the defendant, but the investigations are really what's going to get the weight of my focus in today's episode. So I hope I can bring you the understanding of this case without getting into all of the details that are tremendously difficult. And I will be including the press conference from the U.S. Attorney. I think the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts did an incredible job of breaking down this case in the press conference, and I am going to just play that in its entirety so that you have their words. They did a very good job of breaking down what is alleged, how they came about this investigation. But as we talk about the investigation, I'm also going to give you an overview of the case. On February 4th, 2021, a pregnant Sandra Birchmore was found dead in her Canton, Massachusetts apartment. This was initially and quickly ruled a suicide, and an internal affairs investigation was opened that led to the resignations of Matthew Farwell, his twin brother William Farwell, and the deputy chief Richard Devine. What's interesting about those resignations is they all happened prior to them being interviewed as part of an internal affairs investigation, because it very quickly became apparent that Sandra Birchmore was pregnant with Matthew Farwell's child that they had initially met when she was 12 years old in the Police Explorers Program, and all three of these officers were involved in the Explorers Program and sexually involved with Sandra Birchmore. What is highly relevant to this case is that on January 20th, 2021, one of Sandra's friends contacted Stoughton PD to report that Farwell had been having a sexual relationship with Sandra, and the officer who took the call turned that information immediately over to Farwell, who was enraged. He instructed his colleague not to speak about this to anyone and to never talk about it again. And then he started rage texting Birchmore saying, dude, your fucking friend called my job, Sandra, WTF. This is the beginning of an unraveling of what was a very long period of grooming into Farwell being alleged to have started the sexual relationship with Birchmore when she was 15 and he was 27, and continuing that relationship through her murder. But in the days leading up to her murder, not only had one of her friends contacted her work, but she was getting more vocal about wanting him to be involved in the birth of their child, to be on the birth certificate, and threatening to disclose their relationship to his wife, who at the time was pregnant with their third child and actually gave birth to their third child the morning after Sandra Birchmore was murdered. After Birchmore missed work for several days, a well check was called. Canton PD responded and found Birchmore dead in her apartment. When looking at this investigation now through the things that have been released through the federal investigation, it is surprising that it was initially ruled a suicide. They couldn't have investigated much because there are things in her apartment that were indicative of it not being a suicide, including laundry that was halfway done. She was planning for the birth of her child, buying clothes and strollers and making future plans and appointments, not things that you commonly see with a suicide, and very clearly warranted further investigation. And even though there was an internal affairs investigation that led to 3 officers resigning before they could be interviewed, the Norfolk District Attorney, Michael Morrissey, released a statement in September 2021 saying that their investigation did not produce evidence of criminality in the death of Sandra Birchmore. But then in December of 2022, DA Morrissey stated that they would continue to review the case to determine if criminal charges can be pursued. And at the time, some of the more obvious criminal charges would have been the statutory, because not only was Sandra Birchmore a minor, the age of consent in Massachusetts is 16. There was more than a 10-year age gap between Sandra Birchmore and defendant Farwell. But defendant Farwell was also someone who was in a position of power and trust as a police officer. He was engaging in inappropriate and illegal sexual activity while he was on duty. He was also a mandatory reporter. There are a lot of options for stuff that is illegal had they gone through the text messages. And I will probably talk about it more again in this episode, but the phone dump done in the earliest stages of this police investigation was done by Trooper Nicholas Guarino. If you recognize that name, it's because he's the one that did the data dumps of the phones in the Karen Reed case. So you've got Nicholas Guarino saying that there were no messages between Sandra Birchmore and defendant Farwell, when federal investigators were later able to find over 32,000 messages. We're going to talk about how that might come up when he testifies again in the Karen Reed case in a bit. One of the things I really want to talk about is what changed here from the district attorney and state police all looking at this investigation and saying there's no criminality, from the medical examiners ruling this death a suicide, to where we are now. And where we are now is that former police officer Farwell has been charged with 1 count of killing a witness or victim. Again, the feds make it very clear that it's their belief that because of the phone call and because Sandra Birchmore was becoming more vocal about speaking out about this inappropriate relationship, that the murder was to silence her. But what changed? Part of what changed is that Birchmore's family brought a wrongful death lawsuit. And in the course of that lawsuit, they hired a forensic pathologist who determined that the cause of death was not, in fact, suicide and was a homicide, and did a very thorough report about the findings that indicated that this was not a suicide and that there were injuries to Birchmore that are not typical in suicide and that are much more common in homicide by strangulation. And as we go to the press conference, you will see more of that when the U.S. Attorney General for Massachusetts speaks about the indications that this was not the proper cause of death when it was ruled a suicide. And we're going to turn to that August 28th press conference now. This is the day that the indictment from the federal grand jury was released and that Matthew Farwell was arrested.
Good afternoon. On February 4th, 2021, Sandra Birchmore was found dead in her Canton, Massachusetts apartment. The charges filed today in federal court allege that she was in fact murdered by Matthew Farwell 3 days earlier. At the time of her death, Sandra Birchmore was a 23-year-old woman with her entire life ahead of her, and she was pregnant with her first child. We allege that Sandra Birchmore survived years of grooming, statutory rape, and then sexual violence, all at the hands of Matthew Farwell, who was employed throughout their relationship as an officer and then detective for the Stoughton Police Department. And when it became clear to Mr. Farwell that he could no longer control Sandra Birchmore, he allegedly silenced her permanently. This morning, Matthew Farwell was arrested on a federal grand jury indictment charging him with one count of killing a witness or victim. Specifically, Mr. Farwell is charged with violating Title 18 United States Code 1512 for killing Sandra Birchmore with the intent of preventing her from communicating information about his possible commission of federal crimes. How did this all unfold? What happened here? Well, back in 2010, a 12-year-old Sandra Birchmore applied to join the Stoughton Police Department's Explorers Program, which introduces teens to policing. Officer Matthew Farwell was an instructor in that program. And as alleged in court documents, he befriended Sandra Birchmore, contacted her online, went to the library with her, became friends on Facebook, essentially groomed her. And then he committed statutory rape by having sex with her when he was a 27-year-old police officer and she was just 15 years old. Mr. Farwell continued to have a sexual relationship with Sandra Birchmore until her death 8 years later, allegedly meeting her for sex regularly when he was on duty and being paid by the Stoughton Police Department. Now, in the weeks leading up to Sandra Birchmore's death in February 2021, she found out that she was expecting a baby. And she told Mr. Farwell that he was the father. According to court documents, Ms. Birchmore was very excited about becoming a mother, buying baby clothes and other items, taking precautions to ensure the health of her new child. Sandra Birchmore had good friends, she had a good job, she had dreams of becoming a nurse, and she had a child on the way. But Mr. Farwell did not share in that excitement. It's alleged that Mr. Farwell reacted quite negatively to the news that Sandra Birchmore was pregnant with his child. And he acted angrily, it is alleged, when Sandra Birchmore started making requests of Mr. Farwell around doctor's appointments and ultrasounds and what information would be on the birth certificate. Mr. Farwell was losing control in late 2020, early 2021, and the information that Sandra Birchmore possessed about his illegal conduct was in danger of slipping out. In fact, word started to get out about their relationship. Less than 2 weeks before she was found dead, someone called the Stoughton Police Department and disclosed that Matthew Farwell had had a relationship with Sandra Birchmore. And when Mr. Farwell learned about that call, he became visibly angry. Mr. Farwell, it is alleged in these court papers, started to lose his patience, lose his temper, and the 6'4" Mr. Farwell started to be physically violent with 4'10" Sandra Birchmore. And Sandra Birchmore told her friends that Mr. Farwell had pushed her and shoved her and put her in a chokehold. She was scared. And during that same time, Mr. Farwell was allegedly planning Sandra Birchmore's murder. For the first time, he requested a key to her apartment. And she told friends that he was oddly inspecting the apartment and looking at the closet, including the closet that she was found dead in front of. And then it all came to a head on February 1st, 2021. Mr. Farwell went over to her apartment that evening, and he strangled Sandra Birchmore to death. That's the allegation in this case. And he used his knowledge and experience as a law enforcement officer to stage her death to look like a suicide. He allegedly attempted to cover his tracks to literally try and get away with murder. And he almost did, until today. Back in 2021, with the information that was available, Sandra Birchmore's death was ruled a suicide, or deemed a suicide. But over the last year or so, the FBI and our office have been working exhaustively with our state partners. We've uncovered critical new information, examined the existing information, all of which led to this federal grand jury indictment. If convicted on this charge, Mr. Farwell faces a minimum of life imprisonment. Giving voice to the voiceless, ensuring that no one is above the law, protecting the vulnerable people of Massachusetts, that's the highest calling of people in law enforcement. And this case represents those principles. And every day across Massachusetts, thousands of police officers, federal, state, local law enforcement, put their lives on the line to protect the people of Massachusetts. Mr. Farwell violated those principles, and now he faces very grave consequences. It is disheartening to have to charge law enforcement officers, especially with crimes this serious. But it's our job at the Department of Justice to investigate potential crimes without fear and without favor. We do in this office what we've been doing for decades with our federal partners like the FBI. We follow the facts, regardless of where they lead. We apply the law and the principles of federal prosecution, full stop. We are not influenced by social media chatter. We are not influenced by politics. We're influenced by the facts and the law. Our mission is to do our level best to do justice in every case. And our mission today is to do justice for Sandra Birchmore. Lastly, I want to note that we are sharing the information and the evidence that we developed in this case with the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, with the Massachusetts State Police, and with the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, so they can assess whether state charges may be warranted in this situation. And I want to thank those three agencies. I also want to thank the Stoughton Police Department for their assistance in our investigation. Lastly, I want to commend the women and the men of the FBI Boston and Lakeville for their incredible work on this case. This was a dogged investigation. And as you look at the court papers, you'll see exactly how much work has gone into this matter. A huge credit to them, and I particularly want to thank the members of my office, the office I'm proud to lead, the victim witness advocates, paralegals, the chief of our Human Trafficking and Civil Rights Unit, Liz Riley, Assistant United States Attorneys Tori Cummings and Brian Fogarty. This case doesn't happen without their passion for justice. They deserve the credit, not me.
I think the U.S. Attorney did a very good job of breaking this down. And without getting into all of the details of this investigation, which they lay out in their detention motions, they really do break down their theory of this case very thoroughly and the extensive amount of digital evidence that they went through in this case and how far back that digital evidence goes. Some of that digital evidence had to be available because in the internal affairs investigation, it was indicated that they found that there were, quote, inappropriate relationships and inappropriate sexual relationships. And they must have found that through something after the death of Birchmore. What is really chilling in this case is not only the callousness at which this murder was carried out, but the lengths that the defendant here allegedly went to get Birchmore to delete her text messages. He came over and it seems he cased her apartment to figure out how he was going to stage the murder, giving prosecutors argument for premeditation. And in the indictment, they lay out why this is a federal case. Not only does the charge of the killing of a victim or witness allow for it to be under the federal jurisdiction, but they also brought in the color of law language, talking about the role of trust, that some of this was carried out while he was on duty in his police vehicle, that there were times that he was lying on his time card, and that was wire fraud when he was getting paid during the time he was engaging in this illegal sexual relationship that he had groomed the victim into as part of his role as a police officer. And all of those things led the feds to take over this case. I think that the timing of the findings coming back from the pathologist hired by the victim's family in June, and then this indictment coming down in August, is maybe a little coincidental because there's not a chance that the feds just took an interest in this in June and then brought back a federal grand jury indictment when you're dealing with over 30,000 text messages and other digital evidence. This would have been a much longer investigation. What I really want to know is, did this investigation start because of Sandra Birchmore's death? Did this investigation start because of the Karen Reed case? Or was there something else that triggered an investigation into what the fuck is going on in Canton or into Massachusetts State Police? But we now have two high-profile cases out of Canton where the feds have gotten involved and are investigating. Will we see the end of that federal investigation in the Karen Reed case? I don't know when and if we will see that, because we know there was a lengthy federal grand jury, but we don't know the result of that grand jury, and we don't know if that grand jury is still ongoing. Remember, grand juries can investigate cases, and so they can be open and ongoing, ask for more witnesses, more information. But what happens now that there is a federal prosecution here? You heard the USAG say that they were also referring this back to state prosecutors to see if there are other charges that need to be brought. A thank you to today's sponsor, Factor. Sometimes prepping a meal is just not going to work, and you need healthy options from your fridge, ready in 2 minutes. Factor delivers restaurant quality meals right to your door with premium ingredients like blackened salmon, filet mignon, and shrimp, but you can also pick meat-free options. And you can pick from whatever eating style works for you. Everything from well-balanced to maximizing protein. And you can pick from over 35 different meals. And then they have 60 add-ons so you can make sure that you're taken care of for breakfast and snacks for whatever your week has in store. If you're ready to try Factor for yourself, head to factormeals.com/EDB50 and use code EDB50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code EDB50 at factormeals.com/EDB50 to get 50% off your first box and 20% off your next box. Thank you, Factor, for sponsoring today's episode. And with that, we need to take a look at what the statements of the district attorney in Norfolk County is now. Because we heard that in September 2022, DA Morrissey gave statements to the media saying that there was no evidence of criminality in the death of Sandra Birchmore. In December of 2022, after the family filed their lawsuit, there was a statement that they will continue to review the case and see if charges can be pursued. Let's take a look at the statement given to the media. This is from Ted Daniel, who is a local reporter in Massachusetts, coming from his Twitter feed. This is the statement given by the DA's office on August 28th, 2024, from just the DA's office. It does not say if this is directly credited to DA Michael Morrissey, which indicates to me this is probably coming from their media liaison. Quote, "The Birchmore investigation has remained open and active, but as you know, we do not comment extensively on active investigations. The work has included collaboration with local police, the Attorney General of the Commonwealth, and the FBI, as each entity has unique resources and jurisdiction. 2 state police officers assigned to the Norfolk District Attorney's Office were at the command post for the operation when the apprehension was made in Revere." That is talking about the arrest of the defendant, Farwell. Here, "We look forward to supporting and assisting federal authorities as they pursue this prosecution." That does not indicate to me that they are inclined to look if there are additional prosecutions that may be brought, but we will see what happens. "We look forward to supporting and assisting the federal authorities" is not a "we are evaluating this case for state level prosecutions." And on the same day, the medical examiner's office also released a statement to the media because, well, they have to. How they ruled this case a suicide without much investigation with somebody who had the indicia of future plans, immediate future plans, who seemed excited about a pregnancy, just doesn't make sense. And this is also coming from Ted Daniel saying, "The Massachusetts Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is aware of the federal indictment related to the tragic death of Sandra Birchmore. The medical examiner's office has fully cooperated with the U.S. Attorney's Office on this investigation and will continue to do so. To uphold the integrity of this active federal investigation and prosecution, the OCME respectfully declines to publicly comment on this matter at this time. So that is their comment, giving no comment, and saying that they're cooperating. But the death certificate for Sandra Birchmore still indicates and will still indicate that the cause of death is asphyxia by hanging and that the manner of death is suicide. Of course, we now know that that is not what a forensic pathologist hired by the family found. And I imagine that the federal investigation had another forensic pathologist of their own look at it, very similar to the Karen Reed case, where you have the biomechanical engineers hired by the federal government as part of their grand jury investigation, finding that the victim was not hit by a car. And you have the expert for the state indicating that the victim was in fact hit by a car. And then in the Karen Reed case, you also had conflicting pathology, but you didn't have the pathologist from the OCME saying that it was clear that the cause of death was being hit by a car because the factor of hypothermia played in so much in the Karen Reed case. But you still have this conflict of the experts in the state investigation versus the experts in the federal investigation. Now, when this goes to trial, and this is the type of a case with such a heavy potential sentence, this starts at a minimum of life and maximum of the death penalty. It's unlikely that you will see a plea in this case, but because it is a federal case, it will go to trial eventually behind closed doors. Unlike the Karen Reed case that is set to go to trial in January 2025, where we will see some of this play out. And when I say we will see some of this play out, you have at least one, and I don't know if there are others from state police that were involved in both investigations, but you have a huge discrepancy with Nicholas Guarino. Nicholas Guarino did the data dump on the phones in the Karen Reed case when he testified at the trial. He said that he couldn't find any of the deleted calls or any deleted messages or anything on Jen McCabe's phone. And when he says that there were 0 messages between Birchmore and Farwell, and then it turns out that the feds found over 32,000, that is going to be a massive discrepancy that is going to come up when he has to take the stand again and is cross-examined. And he is an essential witness that has to take the stand because he did a lot of the forensics. So the forensics from this case will play in, and it's something that he can be impeached on because it shows that there have been errors in other investigations. And again, the federal investigation has dug up so much more than the state police investigation that it's going to continue to raise questions. On top of the fact that when we look at a retrial of Karen Reed, and yes, the defense is still appealing the motion to dismiss, but assuming there is a retrial, when you're looking at that retrial, you also have state police investigators that have been relieved from duty at this point, like Michael Proctor. Plus, you now have another very high profile story of a horribly investigated case out of Canton that is something that while jurors may be aware of, how do they put that out of their mind? This case is going to have impact in the fact that it took from 2021 till now for something to happen, and it took the feds to make something happen, is information that's hard for anyone to put out of their mind, especially as you get into the horrific facts in this case. You get into disgusting text messages and inappropriate sexual relationships with a minor. You also have the governor of Massachusetts speaking out about this case, and we saw the governor speak out briefly about the Karen Reed case as well. But in 2 statements early in September, you saw the governor calling this case horrifying and saying, especially as a former prosecutor and attorney general who worked with many victims, quote, "My heart goes out to Sandra Birchmore. May she rest in peace, and her family." Governor Healy said, "The idea that somebody in a position of power preyed on her, it disgusts me. And the people and person who did this need to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. And the Birchmore family deserves justice. We can't bring Sandra back, but it's very important that there be accountability and justice be done." Again, it's interesting to me that the governor said people and person, because I don't think we are done with the prosecutions here. I wonder what else was known with the other officers, including the defendant's twin brother and supervisor that were sued in the wrongful death case, that both left Staunton Police before their interviews as part of the IA investigation. I wonder what more the feds have uncovered from all of the digital evidence recovered from Sandra Birchmore's devices. The fact that she did not delete her devices is going to be the thing that tells the truth about what happened to her. The governor also said that when she learned of this case, she was sickened. She said, quote, not just as an AG and a prosecutor, but just as a person, it's horrifying to know what this young woman went through. I'm glad the U.S. Attorney's Office is investigating, and state police and the medical examiner's office will continue to work with them to get to the bottom of what happened. She went on to say, I will say anything and everything should be done to ensure that Sandra Birchmore and her family have the justice that they need. Maybe we need the medical examiner's office and the state police to sit this one out and figure out how this happened and what other cases this has happened with. The governor was asked by reporters if this case erodes her confidence in investigators with the state police and the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. And she said, quote, look, I have every confidence in the policing of this state and the good work of the men and women in law enforcement across our 351 cities and towns of the state. She also said something happened here. We need to get to the bottom of that and understand that. And I fully support what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing to pursue this. Quote, it just breaks my heart to know that this woman was taken advantage of by someone in a position of power, and maybe others were involved. The governor went on to say, it's horrible, it's sickening, and yeah, they should be held accountable to the fullest extent under the law. While you can't bring poor Sandra and her baby back, her family deserves answers, and she deserves justice. Two different statements where the governor indicates that there are multiple people involved here. I don't think we are at the end of seeing the prosecutions in this case. I don't know if we will see any state level prosecutions, but just because there was one indictment doesn't mean that the feds are done indicting individuals. And it is tremendously common for the feds to indict people separately in cases. When I went through the timeline of this case, I can see why so many of you asked me to take a look at it and asked me how this might connect to the Karen Reed case. And this was before the indictment. I saw it in the comments as we were live streaming the Karen Reed case. I didn't realize it so quickly after that case ended that there would be an indictment in this case. I don't know if anyone did or was prepared for that, but it seemed that the civil wrongful death suit was gaining traction based on the findings of an independent pathologist, and that those findings are tremendously instructive here, though I am sure the feds have made similar findings with their own experts. It shouldn't be that families have to hire independent pathologists and have to investigate the investigation, but in this case, that's clearly what was required. I also have to wonder if with all of this, we will see those wrongful death suits with the city of Stoughton and the Stoughton Police Department settling quickly and somewhat quietly. We are going to take a look at the indictment. The indictment does not have nearly as many details as the motions in support of pretrial detention. Those are the extensive motions that break down all of the text messages and more detail in what was happening and being said between the victim and the defendant in this case. The indictment goes over the general allegations and the charges, and we're going to take a look at that together before we are done with this episode. Thank you to today's sponsor, Shopify. Not only does Shopify run the Law Nerd Shop and so many other shops that you love across the internet, but they make it easy to sell whether you are online or in person or a combination of both. So if you have been thinking about selling for the holidays, or you want to see what it might look like to start up your own shop, Shopify's $1 per month free trial might be a great fit for you. Not only do they have a ton of templates that you can customize for yourself, but they have award-winning customer service that will help you if you get stuck in getting your shop up and running. Not only has Shopify allowed me to start when I didn't have the money to invest in the Law Nerd shop, but it has grown with me and made it easy, not just to ship in the US, but to take care of Law Nerds all across the world. If you are ready to upgrade your experience, it's time to get the same checkout we have with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month free trial period at shopify.com/lawnerd. Remember, that's all lowercase. That's shopify.com/lawnerd, and you'll be hearing this sound soon. Let's get back to today's episode. This is the United States versus Matthew Farwell. General allegations. Between on or about March 27th, 2012, and on or about April 1st, 2022, defendant Farwell was a sworn officer of the Stoughton Police Department in Stoughton, Massachusetts. In his capacity as a police officer, he served as an instructor for the Police Explorers Academy, which was a vocational program for local youth. The Police Explorers was designed to enable youth participants to learn about law enforcement careers. Sandra Birchmore was born in May 1997. In or about March 2010, Sandra Birchmore applied to be a participant in Police Explorers. At the time, she was 12 years old. She began participating in the program in the spring of 2010 and remained in the program through 2016. Prior to, in or around 2012, and yes, all indictments have in or around, because they don't have to have that particularity with date, and it allows room for the testimony to come out in trial. But prior to in or around 2012, Farwell was an Explorers volunteer. He became an instructor when he started working for Stoughton Police in 2012. Before Birchmore attained the age of 16 years old, Farwell engaged in sexual intercourse and other sex acts with her. His sexual conduct with her continued in or around early 2021. And that was described in the press conference and elsewhere up until she was murdered. The police department required employees, including police officers, to accurately report their time and attendance in order to receive wages and overtimes. During some of the shifts where Farwell was supposed to be performing his duties as a police officer, he was engaging in sex acts with the victim Birchmore. He failed to disclose that information and took steps to conceal his conduct from other department employees. In or around December 2020, Birchmore learned that she was pregnant and told Farwell he was the father. On or about January 20th, 2021, Birchmore's friend called Stoughton Police Department and told the department employee that Farwell had been having sex with Birchmore. Shortly thereafter, Stoughton Police Department employee told Farwell about the call. On or about February 1st, Farwell killed Birchmore by strangulation and thereafter staged her Canton, Massachusetts apartment to make it appear as if it was a suicide. Count 1 is 18 U.S.C. 1512 A1C, killing of a witness or victim. The grand jury charges that happened on February 1st, 2021 in Canton, Massachusetts, and that Matthew Farwell did kill Sandra Birchmore, a person known to the grand jury, with malice of forethought, willfully, deliberately, maliciously, with premeditation, with the intent to prevent the communication by any person to a law enforcement officer of information relating to the commission or possible commission of a federal offense, to wit, commission or possible commission of the federal offenses of deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of 18 U.S.C. 242, coercion and enticement, 18 U.S.C. 2422, and wire fraud, 18 U.S.C. 1343. So what that means is that they are bringing in the federal causes of action. These are the federal things: deprivation of rights, coercion and enticement, and wire fraud. Those are the alleged federal crimes that Farwell was engaged in. And Birchmore was a witness to those crimes. And when it comes to the deprivation of rights and the enticement, the victim of those crimes. And she, they are alleging, was killed to keep her silent as to those crimes. That is why there is a federal jurisdiction here. That is why they charged it this way. And that is why in the detention documents, it gets so detailed into the conversations between the two of them, that he was on duty during times he was sexually involved with her while she was a minor, the texts and more. So all of that in the detention documents is to keep him in custody, which is not unusual when facing life in prison or possibly the death penalty, though the federal death penalty is fairly rare. But when you are in custody with such a serious crime, when you have used a position of power and trust to commit that crime, it's not uncommon that they would be kept in custody. But also, the U.S. Attorney's Office said, here's everything that you need to know, and put it all in those documents. So when that comes to court, it is unlikely that there will be anything other than staying in custody. And that detention hearing for defendant Farwell is set for September 12th, 2024. And there will be a status conference October 17th, 2024. I am also putting links down below if resources are needed. If you know or you are experiencing domestic violence, there are resources down below for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And if someone you know is in crisis, there are links to 988, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It seemed that Sandra Birchmore was telling those in her life what was going on and that people were trying to help her. Unfortunately, when they called to help, the person who they called to help passed that information along to the person who was abusing her. And the fact that the police department didn't see anything strange about that when they then ruled her death a suicide is mind-boggling to me. There are so many red flags here and so much information that was known early on in this investigation that just wasn't acted upon. We will see what the feds continue to do with Canton, Massachusetts. I hope this episode breaking down what is going on in this case without the sensationalism helped you engage with this story. And I appreciate you for being here, for being a law nerd. This one's a hard one, but the hard ones need to be discussed. And with that, I will see you in the next one. So take a deep breath, take care of you. May your Wi-Fi be strong. May your toilet paper be plentiful. May your family be well, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Thank you again for being a law nerd. I will see you in the next one. You can stay up to date with everything I'm covering on our free iOS and Android app at lawnerdapp.com or search your app store for Law Nerd. And you can also follow me on social media at the Emily D. Baker. Remember, I stream on YouTube on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I recap all of that for you in quick bits on Monday. And of course, The Emily Show drops on Wednesdays. Thanks for being a Law Nerd.